Ben Shalom has done a couple interviews over the past few days. This one with IFL TV I find particularly interesting because he addresses the Lawrence Okolie situation as well as suggestions that he made an illegal approach to Lawrence Okolie while he was still under contract with Matchroom. Ben Shalom refutes that, and he offers what I guess you could describe as a theory as to why Matchroom are behaving the way that they are with Lawrence Okolie trying to leave them. And the theory is that firstly, they're trying to intimidate other promoters away from approaching Matchroom fighters who they believe to be out of contract. And Ben Shalom says unequivocally that he will not be intimidated and that they will continue, presumably, to approach fighters who they believe to be out of contract. And just because it's this big company that's existed for a number of decades that's so powerful and they got so much money, they won't allow that to, again, prevent them from approaching fighters legally. And the other part of the theory is the suggestion that Matchroom are trying to intimidate their own fighters away from leaving because presumably they will make it extremely difficult for you to leave. Lawrence Okolie has apparently found it difficult, and Ben Shalom reveals that Natasha Jonas apparently found it difficult leaving Matchroom, as in there were basically obstacles put in her way. And he says that there are other fighters who have crossed over. He doesn't name them, but he says there are other fighters who have crossed over who've also found it difficult. Now, obviously, as a rival to Eddie Hearn, Ben Shalom, he can't be expected to be completely objective. He's got skin in the game. He wants fighters to leave Matchroom and join Sky and Boxer. Okay, so he's going to spin narratives where he can, right? And I know he doesn't want to get into the whole promoter beef and the soap opera of that. He said that a number of times. But is it more likely that he's going to say things or spin narratives in a certain way that will make Matchroom look good or look bad? It's obviously going to be the latter, right? So, yeah, I'm well aware of that. But nevertheless, there's usually no smoke without fire. And we know that Lawrence Okolie's had issues with Matchroom. To me, it isn't a stretch of the imagination to think that there are other fighters besides Natasha Jonas and Lawrence Okolie who have had issues with Matchroom recently. And as I've said in some videos I've done over the past few months, Eddie Hearn's behavior has been changing as far as I'm concerned due to the fact that he's under tremendous pressure to deliver for his broadcaster DAZN, who are hemorrhaging money. And it's not that Eddie Hearn has been changed, there are aspects of his personality that didn't exist before. No, those aspects of his personality, being more, let's say, ruthless and tough, those aspects were always there, but they were latent and they've been brought to the fore, they've been brought to the surface by circumstance. That's my take on it. And so we're seeing the kind of mean and nasty side of Eddie Hearn now. Maybe the spiteful, vindictive side, because as everyone has pointed out, including Ben Shalom, if he's losing all this money on Lawrence Okolie fights, then why not just let him go? Why retain him for another fight and lose even more money? And Eddie Hearn's response to that has always been, he's doing this as a way of defending himself against criticism, against fighters saying that, well, like Lawrence Okolie suggested, comparing him to Leo DiCaprio's character in Django. And he seems to suggest that this is the reason he's doing what he's doing. So this is spitefulness from Eddie Hearn, vindictiveness from Eddie Hearn, that he potentially would risk losing more money just to prove a point and get back at the fighter, somebody who he basically believes has insulted him. Now, that's potentially true, but then maybe Eddie Hearn has exaggerated the amount of money he's lost on Lawrence Okolie or the amount of money he's spent on Lawrence Okolie. That's also a possibility, right? And therefore, maybe it's not him thinking that he's going to lose money, but he actually wants to make money. He did, according to Lawrence Okolie, demand $500,000 as a way of Okolie buying his way out of the contract. So make it out what you will. But if you haven't seen this interview with Ben Shalom, I recommend it. This other interview he did more recently, this was actually on the weekend, he reiterates his position that Lawrence Okolie is out of contract as far as he's concerned. And he seems even more certain of it now, perhaps because the time constraint on Lawrence Okolie's contract has expired. So the way that contracts often work is you'll have a number of fights. So let's say a fighter signs a 5-fight contract, but there'll also be a time limit on it. So the promoter has to deliver 5 fights within, let's say, 2-3 years. And if the end of that 2-3 years comes and the fights haven't been delivered, the fighter can still leave. You see, there's a expiration date on the contract. Mikey Garcia, when he was with Bob Arum, apparently had to do this. He had to wait for his contract to expire. I think he waited something like 2 years, and he wasn't fighting in that time. Waited 2 years, his contract expired, then he was able to leave. Has that happened with Lawrence Okolie now? You know, we've talked about the fact that there's this purse bid for Lawrence Okolie's mandatory or potential purse bid, and that could be the reason that Okolie's now able to speak and potentially able to leave. But perhaps it's nothing to do with that. Maybe it's to do with the contract expiring now, maybe in the past few weeks, whereby, you know, the Matchroom have no legal hold over him anymore. And according to Ben Shalom, Matchroom have acknowledged that the contract is now expired as well. So we'll see what happens from here. But I'm certainly going to be pleased that a fighter, a top-level fighter, a world champion no less, can move on without getting bogged down in some legal battle with a promoter, because we've seen that far too many times. Andre Ward was involved in a situation like that with Dan Goosen, who's since passed. As I say, Mikey Garcia. There were a number of Sauerland fighters back in the days who had these difficulties. So, and look, a lot of people don't understand that contracts can be interpreted in different ways. People seem to believe that a contract is black and white and that it's very clear who's in the right and who's in the wrong in a contract. That's often not the case. That's why these legal situations can get drawn out, because there's a dispute about the wording in the contract and what it actually means. And so the lawyers for one party are arguing that it means one thing, and the lawyers for the other party are arguing that it means something else, and it gets dragged out and dragged out and dragged out, and eventually whoever, a judge, an arbitrator, can rule one way or the other. So it's not so straightforward as to just say, oh, Eddie's in the right and Lawrence is in the wrong. Oftentimes, the party that has a lot more money, even if they know they're in the wrong, they'll drag it through a legal process anyway, because they know that they've got time. They know that they've got deep pockets, and that the other side, what they're hoping is the other side just gives up, because even though they may be in the right, they don't have the money to be able to continue the legal battle. And also with regards to a fighter, they don't want to be wasting all this time. Now, I'm not saying that's the case with Matchroom and Lawrence Okolie, but it's a possibility. I don't jump immediately to the conclusion that Matchroom are in the right and Lawrence Okolie's in the wrong and so on and so forth. It's a legal dispute. If it was an open and shut case, I don't think it would have dragged out for this long. You see my point? Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below about this Lawrence Okolie situation. Hopefully he can just leave Matchroom, sign with Ben Shalom, and be more careful, right? Maybe put certain provisions. That's the thing that he can do in this situation, is future-proof his contracts better than the contract with Matchroom, so that he doesn't fall into the same trap. And of course, his lawyers, the ones he's been working with, will surely be looking to do that, to make sure that the next contract can't be interpreted in any other way than, you know, he has this number of fights and there's no fights outside of that. And if there are fights outside of that contract, he has to sign a separate contract agreeing to them. You see it? Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments about Ben Shalom, and what do you think about Shalom's theory that Eddie Hearn is trying to intimidate current Matchroom fighters away from leaving, and also intimidate rival promoters away from approaching Matchroom fighters who they believe are out of contract? Is this what Eddie Hearn is doing? And if it is, does Eddie Hearn sink in your estimations? Are you disappointed by the fact that he's doing that? Or did you expect this all along, that eventually we would see the more ruthless and nasty side of Eddie Hearn as he progressed through his boxing career as a promoter? Because, you know, Eddie Hearn has said himself many times, this is what this business does to you. It makes you ruthless because everybody else is ruthless. So anyway, let me know what you guys think.